is the first building to use this idea of a skeletal frame to carry the weight. This became known then as the Chicago School style of architecture, a school of thought in which all these designers were arriving in Chicago after the fire, taking advantage of the great work opportunities they had here in this rapidly rebuilding city that was also growing very quickly. And they began sharing ideas using new technologies that were available, such as the Otis elevator, improvements in electricity, making habitation in tall buildings possible. This then gave way to some of the first high-rise buildings anywhere in the world. Now, if you look to your right, over the trees here in the background, you're going to see this rather nondescript brown brick loft building. And it's standing between those two high-rises over there, over on Wells Street. Not really much to look at, but you see that grid pattern in the facade with these really big three-part windows between those brown brick vertical piers. That is an example of Chicago School-style building. The brick piers are covering up the structure on the inside, the vertical columns, horizontal floor plates, and then you fill in the voids with as big windows as you can to allow for maximum light and air. Because we didn't have air conditioning yet, electricity was still in its infancy. So this really became the predominant architectural style around the turn of the 20th century. But in 1893, we held a World's Fair called the Columbian Exposition. And this World's Fair was a grand success, and people were just so wowed and dazzled by the marvel and the scale of this grand white classical city designed by Daniel Burnham on the city's south side. It looked like Washington, D.C. on steroids, if you will. And people wanted their architectural commissions to look like these neoclassical and Beaux-Arts buildings, not like the modern Chicago school style that was just becoming very popular. As such, from the 1890s to the 1920s, neoclassicism became the style of choice, where Chicago school style really began fading away into history. And you'll see a classical building coming into view soon over a parking garage. It has a column line, a floor below the roof, a decorative skull. Behind her, that very slender building with the pyramid roof, that's an Art Deco design. That's the Chicago Board of Trade, built in 1930. Then we have our modernist buildings, of course, right in front of us as we clear this bridge, right here on the riverbank. This is the example of international style building. And of course, you see it in our tallest building, which is just now going out of it. You're going to see it again very soon, the Sears or Willis Towers, as known today. We pivoted in the 1980s to building structures that were postmodern design, which was a reaction to the simplicity of the steel and glass modernism. We started incorporating back in masonry facades and historical features. We are still building modernist structures today, just sort of a new take on it. And that, in a nutshell, is 100 years of architectural evolution. I'll handle your quizzes momentarily. If those of you visiting the bar downstairs, we're going to check comprehension downriver in about 30 minutes.
Too fast, right?
So as you look up, we see this diagram. That's Map River South Bridge. From that observatory, 4 states are seen on a clear day: Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin. When you look toward Michigan, you are staring into the future. It's the Eastern time zone across the lake. The building is designed to sway over 6 inches in each direction, allow for wind loading on the building. 16,100 bronze tinted windows, which from day one have been cleaned by robotic window washers. And the design of the building utilized something new called bundled tube framing, a brand new structural framing system invented by engineer Fosler Kahn for this project. It's effectively 9 skyscrapers bundled into one. They rest around collectively, but they end at these different alternating heights, giving way to the setbacks as you go up the building. 2 of which stop at floor 50, 2 more stop at floor 66, 3 more rise at 90th floor. Last 2 structural tubes rise to floor 108. That is then top of the 2-story mechanical penthouse for the grand total of 110 floors, 1,450 feet, 7 1/2 inches, or 442.1 meters, making it the tallest building in the world upon its completion in 1974, a title held arguably until 1998. And no more than we have 2004. So the debate rested upon those broadcast antennas on top, which do not count in the structural height. Antennas never count, but spires do. Spires might look like antennas, but don't have a functional purpose. They count though because they're part of the building's architecture and they generally don't change. Whereas antennas, like those, change all the time. That's just broadcasting equipment. In fact, those have gone up and down over the years, and that's why they don't count. Now, the Sears Company, formerly Sears Roebuck and Company, largest retailer in the world, when they developed that as their headquarters. They have not been there, though, since 1993. I think it's their name calls it Willis Tower. So we're going to have a relatively low bridge out of us, folks. Just please take notice as we approach. Then right beyond here we have the Civic Opera House on your right-hand side, which is a blend of Art Deco and Beaux-Arts stylization. It was commissioned by Samuel Insull, a very wealthy individual who lived in utilities, big fan of the opera. Building an opera house, they typically operate at profit loss. So this comes up with the idea of attaching an office building above the opera house, all the rents upstairs, so subsidize any financial loss down below. Everything's going to work out just fine, right? In theory, sure. However, this building opened in November of 1929, 10 days after Black Tuesday and the onset of the Great Depression, was thus a financial disaster for Mr. Insull. The opera went bankrupt about 6 months later. There is still an opera house within here, shaped to the bottom of this building, which is also sculpted by way of the riverwalk passing around it, as well as all this public green space. City of Chicago requires any riverfront development to include a public setback of at least 30 feet. This has been the case since 1987. That public riverwalk must remain open to the sky. You're allowed to encroach upon it, as they did here, as long as you provide compensatory open space on that site. And that's why you have all the additional green space wrapping the building. To your right, then, we have this brick building covered with ivy, which is given a nickname. Some Chicagoans call it the Ch-Ch-Ch-Chia, that building. Actual name, Great Lakes Building, opened 1912, done in the Chicago school style, where again we have that grid of masonry and the large windows set into the voids of the grid. It's going to be a low bridge in front of you, folks. Please remain seated on this upper deck. Do not come up the stairs the next 15-20 seconds. It is a low bridge. I get lower than this, too. So, that brick building is an example of a mercantile warehouse. Chicago was the world's busiest inland water port at the turn of the 20th century. That port was not on Lake Michigan. We didn't have an actual harbor, so it was right along the banks of the river. There used to be a lot of buildings like that lined up wall to wall with each other all the way down. Office buildings that were designed by the same architecture firm, Cohn Pedersen Fox, in a span of over 20 years. The blue building is the oldest of the trio, right behind the elevated railroad tracks, finished in 2002. That's the newest of the trio. It sits on a very historic site. In 1868, Wooden Convention Hall was built there, called the Wigwam, which had hosted the Republican National Convention of that year, who nominates Abraham Lincoln for the presidency on that site. Now, the Wigwam didn't last very long. Since it was built entirely of wood, it did not survive the Great Chicago Fire that swept through and leveled all of downtown 11 years later. The curved green building is 333 West Wacker, also known as New Veen Building, and it has that graceful curve matching the bend of the river. Green glass, which you can call the river water. Stone clad base, matching many stone bases of historic buildings throughout the downtown, but it's also where the mechanical systems are. Usually placed on the top of an office building, often the roof. They're brought down to the second floor here as developers not believe any offices are going to pay high rent. Look down upon those noisy elevated railroad tracks. So it's done for some acoustical isolation. And it's a very contextual design that's molded to fit into its surroundings. That is a very common characteristic of the postmodern period, which began popularity in the 1980s. Buildings start taking on characteristics of their surroundings. The other sides of the building you're about to see as we carry this bridge are flat, and they fit direct to the linear street grid. It's also a great view of the Sears or Willis Tower down the street if you want to get your camera ready. So overall, that green building is shaped like a wedge of pie. And for contextual purposes, we'll say deep dish pizza. So Cohn Pedersen Fox, who designed that, was so successful that they asked him a couple years later to the 225 West Wacker building clad with stone. They specified the stones reflected in the green glass of 333 building creates a chill contrast between the two, and the stone cladding also plays off the masonry clad neighbors to the east, and plays off of the Art Deco style of merchandise marked across the river to the north, which we'll talk about later on the return. Another low bridge in front of you. Please remain seated, not come up the stairs. Low bridge. So just beyond this, we have the Builders Building, which was built in two phases in a span of over 60 years. Phase 1 came in 1920. It's a larger section with all of classical ornamentation on, designed by Graham Anderson, Probst, and White. The addition of the Oriole windows, the big one is not continued all the way down to the ground, was added on in the 1980s and designed by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. Notice how that facade is also vertically broken into 3 sections. It's referred to as a tripartite facade. It was invented in Chicago as these buildings started growing taller and taller. Architects did not know what the outside of the building was supposed to look like. So they began breaking it up like a classical column with 3 distinct components: a base, a shaft, and a capital. Gave the desire found by how tall the building grew. Then beyond the bridge, we have this blue building that notches in the facade known as 111 West Wacker Drive. There's a luxury 58-story rental apartment building designed by Handel Architects. But it started construction as a 90-story building. They started construction before completing financing, and when the recession hit 2008, their contractor walked off the job and stopped getting paid the 28th floor. That's why that boat facade stops halfway up. The design changed. Finishes what you see now. Look down the street canyon just past that blue facade. In a very brief moment, you'll see a high-rise church. This is the world's tallest church, although it's really a church on top of an office building above another church. So think of it as a church sandwich with lawyer's offices in the middle. Can't make that up. 77 West Wacker Drive with silver blue facade was completed in 1992, designed by Ricardo Bofill, a Spanish architect, to call that an example of modern classicism, modeled after Campanile or Bell Tower from Florence, Italia. So by classical details, an otherwise modern glass office tower from 1992. Then we step down to 55 West Wacker, an example of brutalism. Brutalism is a real architectural style. It's an offshoot facade made up of two different shades of gray. Man, versus when that lounge is open, they don't really align. So he was probably never up there. That dome today is the architectural office of Jan, an architecture firm founded by German-born Chicago architect Helmut Jan. The green building, the golden top sitting in the sunlight, is the carbide and carbon building, known as the Hotel Pendry. Time of the sons of Daniel Burnham, those of Burnham Brothers, who made it look like a champagne bottle on purpose, as they wanted to rebel a statement to prohibition, which was effectively went up back in the 1920s. The gray checkerboard pattern right in front of it is Hilton Garden Inn Hotel, or as I've been calling it, the 50 Shades of Grey Hotel. And it's about 15 years old. It's also sitting on a very unique block in downtown Chicago, where it's triangular in form. Most blocks are rectilinear. And every single high-rise building on this block has hotel rooms inside it, including this white terracotta-clad, very slender neo-Gothic building known as Mather Tower originally, dating back to 1928. It's one of the tallest buildings in Chicago at that time, and it was an office building originally. It is now a hotel. If you stay in the top 3 floors of that hotel, you have the entire floor to yourself, the 360-degree view from your room. Next door to that is the London House Hotel. Glass facade is new construction, but the London House is bigger than that and encompasses the entirety of that stone-clad building just to the left, which had been fully renovated for this hotel project, and they inserted then a 3-level rooftop bar. The stone building dates back to 1923. It was designed by Alfred Oshler, and it has all the neoclassical and Beaux-Arts bells and whistles. Everything comes at the base of the building up near the top in that 3-part facade. Garlands, coats of arms, urns, and griffins carved in the stonework. A balustrade ups the roof line, then a cupola tops the whole thing off. Concave curve steps it back for the footprint of Fort Dearborn, a military fort that existed on that site from 1803. It was attacked in the War of 1812 and burned to the ground. Rebuilt in 1916, decommissioned, demolished in the 1850s. Very low bridge in front of you, folks. Lowest on the river. Please do remain seated. Do not come up the stairs for about 30 seconds. Low bridge. As we approach, it's going to be limbo time. How low can you go? Whoa. So just beyond this, we have 333 North Michigan Avenue, this very slender stone-clad building, which was heavily reminiscent of the second place winning entry of the Chicago Tribune competition. The first place winner of this design contest for the Chicago Tribune newspaper headquarters was built across the river to your left. And that's it right there, the ornate flying buttresses, finished in 1925. Second place entry to that competition, very much like that more slender building across the river to the right. And it was basically Copybiblial by Halliburton Root, the Copybiblial Sarn in second place winning entry. They used it for that commission. A little architectural plagiarism, if you will. To the east of that, on the right-hand side, is Illinois Center, an 83-acre complex comprised of shops, offices, condominiums, rental apartments, and hotels, all sitting on a 3-level street system. The reason why it's elevated off the ground is first you believe they are built on air rights above the Illinois Central Railroad, and this big freight tunnel right along the south bank of the river in this location. And there's a passenger rail station at the south end of this complex that extends under Millennium Park. Nothing more than a big green roof capping the rail station adjacent parking garage facility. The tallest building within Illinois Center is that tall white one with the clean vertical lines rising to the top. That is known as the Aon Center. It was known originally as Standard Oil Building when it finished in 1973. In 73, it was also the tallest building in Chicago for 1 year. Standard Oil changed their name to Amoco. Then it became known as the Amoco Building. Amoco was bought by British Petroleum. They moved out and transferred and named the building after themselves. It also used to be the tallest marble-clad building in the world. Used to be, not because a taller marble-clad building was constructed somewhere else. That white building in the background no longer has a marble exterior. See, someone in the firm of Admiral Durrell Stone and Associates designed it, made this critical mistake of ordering the white Carrara marble panels from Italy cut too thin. In those thin marble panels comes in the temperature fluctuations of the freeze-thaw cycle as you winter fall. After 20 years of exposure to the elements, that marble began to buckle and crack, and the decision was made to go ahead and strip it off the building, which was then replaced in Mount Airy Grant, North Carolina, at a cost of over $80 million. There's a very corny most of that story, but the architect, Mr. Stonecrocker, could take marble for granted. Thank you. Try the bill. It's delicious. So Illinois Center, which that's a part of, was going to continue in additional phases, building out additional blocks all the way out to the Lakeshore Drive, the next bridge in front of us. Never finished for $18.5 million, and with that price tag, they also got the upper level setback as their own personal outdoor terrace in the sky. So Illinois Center, or Lakeshore East rather, is almost fully built out now after some 22 years of construction. The most recent additions have been a 37-story rental apartment building and 47-story condo building known as Cirrus and Cascade, designed by local firm BKL. The Cascade Tower, the condominium building, is just over there to your right, behind this open gap in the trees. That open gap will soon be filled in an 85-story residential building. That's a future phase of Lakeshore East. And then there's one other site over on Columbus Drive, which will be a roughly 50-story rental apartment and hotel building. And that way, Lakeshore East is fully built out. They do have to construct, though, a public school. That is part of the development agreement for that 28-acre project, which does feature a 6-acre public park in the center. Now we've cleared the Lakeshore Drive Bridge and come upon our pride and joy in Chicago, which is our lakefront and lakefront park system. Grant Park, which is off to your right, encompasses all this green space beyond the high-rises, was intended to remain forever open, free, and clear, a common ground for public use. When that declaration was made in 1830, the waterfront was at Michigan Avenue, 3 bridges behind you. Everything between that last little bridge to the limbo under and where you're at now is built on landfill, artificial land. Some of that debris from the Great Chicago Fire thrown into the lake built upon over the years. In 1852, the city cuts a deal, the Illinois Central Railroad. It allowed them to build a railroad trestle offshore. The trains come over the water of Lake Michigan, parallel to the shore that they approach downtown Chicago. That turns them out to the river into this industrial freight terminal that Lakeshore East Illinois Center were then eventually built on. And the industrialization of the river's mouth begins to draw the ire of some of the property owners along Michigan Avenue, namely Aaron Montgomery Ward, who's earning himself a fortune in the mail order catalog business, a business concept he actually invented. He begins a fight with the city to clean the property up, arguing that that open, free, and clear clause also stated the law, the Lake Shore Protection Ordinance, ensuring that any land on the east side of Lakeshore Drive will be and only be a public or recreational use. So no more private development east of Lakeshore Drive. That is not our prohibition on buildings. You can still put buildings out there, such as field houses and museums, public buildings, but not private structures. So if you live in Lake Drive, chances are your view is protected for life. There's only one area of the lake hugely past decorating the exteriors, such as with the brick cladding, the projected cornice lines below the roofs, and the 5-level townhouses behind the trees, harkening back to this old-timey urban neighborhood feel. You can see how visually busy these facades are compared to, say, the sleek steel and glass minimalist approach of Lake Point Tower in the background over our shoulder, or the sleek glass facade of St. Regis, for example, across the river to our left. Now, those townhouses beside us also hide the parking garage from view. Interesting to look at the townhouses and say the blank brick wall you have the neighboring building, which is creating this parking podium. But even there, it's articulated with different colors of brick, different sizes. It breaks up the visual mass of those parking floors. Now, right in front of that building on your right-hand side, we have this tiered granite structure beside us, which is not much to look at right now, but it is actually a fountain. It hasn't been turned on this year. It has what could be the longest of any fountain in the world. It is officially known as the Nicholas J. Mellis Memorial Centennial Plaza Fountain and Water Arc of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. Now, the organization, whose name is amid that word salad I just sputtered out, using the much shorter title of Chicago Sanitary District. They're responsible for reversing the flow of the river and keeping it clean. You might not be aware this, the river you're on right now flows backwards. It used to flow into Lake Michigan behind you, now it flows away from the lake. Why? Well, a century ago, Chicago, the world's most disgusting, violent, filthy waterway, which had all these factories in a very industrial city, dumping industrial waste into the Chicago River.
So they dump it
City sewers dumped into the Chicago River. And a little bit further south, we had a place called the Union Stockyards, the largest stockyard operation the world had ever seen after it opened on Christmas Day, 1865. We were done converting livestock into various meat products. Leftover carcasses, blood, and urine were thrown into a small creek feeding into the Chicago River. Methane gas would then rise to the surface from decomposing biomatter thrown into the creek, causing it to bubble. The bubbling creek, it still bubbles to this day like a glass of champagne. Now, the river's a big funnel. That filth collects together, heads out to the lake behind you, where Chicago gets its drinking water from. Cheers. Now, obviously, this causes problems. People are dying from cholera and typhoid outbreaks. So the solution in 19th century industrial America is to not clean the river up. Oh, no, no, no. Make the river go the other way. And by digging a canal to the southwest, we flush all that filth away from the lake and then send it right on down to St. Louis. Problem solved.
Yeah,
Shorter building to your right is the Gleacher Center. It's the downtown campus of University of Chicago's Graduate School of Business. You'll notice how once we pull beyond that building, the green glass, how much of the west side has no windows. That's because the director of that school told architect Dirk Lohan, "I don't want my students distracted by the beautiful views outside of the building." Those classrooms have no windows. Now, Mr. Lohan, who designed that building, is also the grandson of Ludwig Mies van, that man who came here from Germany. The gray building 401 North Michigan Avenue today underwent a pretty extensive renovation a few years ago, which added the glass pavilion in front, our new Apple store designed by Foster and Partners of London. Then right behind there, we have the beautiful Neo-Gothic Tribune Tower once again, a result of an international design competition to design the most beautiful office building in the world, the grand prize of $50,000. Then the entry you see beside you, submitted by two New York architects, John Mittal and Raymond. Chicago is longer in this building. Then, right dead center in front of us, this huge building with the Bigley sign is the Trump International Tower and Hotel, which was completed in 2009 and designed by Adrian Smith, formerly of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, who has since left that firm and started his own practice known as Adrian Smith Gordon Gill Architecture. Adrian Smith, no applied ornament, no decorative spires, finishes, or anything of that nature. The I-beams holding the windows in place also work to give that facade a wonderful sense of depth, texture, and proportions. Mies was famous for saying less is more, and God is in the details. Truly felt pin of potential that is all the decoration the building would then ever need. By contrast, on the next block, we have the corn cobs on the rivers, are commonly referred to. Marina City, as they are officially known, was completed in the mid-1960s and designed by Bertrand Goldberg, who's a student of Mies and studied under the Bauhaus School in Germany. But the contrast now between student and professor. Marina City was originally planned to include affordable housing for the Janitors Union of Chicago, but to build a residential community, who at the time was a commercial industrial city core, that incorporate a lot of amenities to attract people to live here. Include their own shops, restaurants, offices, bowling alley, amphitheater, and then their own marina down at river level. If you are curious about that parking garage, it is valet only. You don't self-park your car. And a car is never off the other ramp on accident, but twice on purpose. Both times for filming included The Hunter with Steve McQueen. No, not the Blues Brothers. I heard the Blues Brothers. They did jump a bridge, though, but not on the Chicago River. That was at 95th Street on the Calumet River on the far south side. So then on your right, we have two buildings went up in 1987. The first with the darker windows, former Hotel Nikko, upscale Japanese hotel, known today as River Northwest, designed by HOK. Then the green building, that was designed by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. So you can probably get removable bridges that rotate on what's called a trunnion, which is like an axle, and the bridge pivots like a lunch door on the riverbank. That's not how this bridge operates beside you. This is a vertical lift bridge, sometimes called an elevator lift because it functions just like an elevator. Center span rises as one level piece, as does the giant concrete counterweights come down. When the bridge is fully open, there is 130 feet of navigational clearance below the bridge deck. Those towers are 195 feet tall. The bridge dates back to 1916. It was designed by Waddell and Harrington, some of the premier bridge engineers of their time. Built by the Pennsylvania Railroad, it was referred to as Bridge 421. Today we just said www.istheresewageinthechicago.com. Actual website to reference if I'm going kayaking in the river. People do. You saw them. If you kayak in the river, I do highly recommend taking a shower afterwards. Being updated on various shots, not a bad idea either. Should the kayak tip over, we just call that a taste of Chicago. Now, I don't mean to undercut the amazing strides made in cleaning this river up. By virtue, we regard this as a recreational amenity today compared to where we were, say, in 1980. That alone is pretty amazing because no one even imagined that was even possible at that time back in the 80s. We have no evidence of a cow kicking over a lantern. A few years ago, the city council did officially exonerate the cow of all blame for starting the fire. Now, what we do know is the fire did start in the barn. Ironically, the Leary home did not burn. It left intact as a third of the city burns to the ground around her. And the fire spread very quickly because Chicago is a very combustible place. We were a city